Let's take a look. So the unit I belong to, the Foreign Trade Administration, it operates an array of about 50 trade missions globally. Recently in America, we've opened, 4 years ago, we've opened our office in Lima, our office in Santiago, and we also closed our office in Chicago. The trend in the ministry is gradually withdrawing from developed countries, alongside opening new missions in the developing countries. And this trend is still continuing. The last mission that were open or declared to be open would be in the United Arab Emirates, as we had some warm up in the relationship with them. Our mission is supporting every aspect of promotion of trade and globalization, more towards the export, promotion of the Israeli exports to the world. If you look at the bottom left brick or slice, this is the division I belong to, trade policy. In our division, we're responsible for negotiating, maintaining, periodically updating our trade agreements, and also addressing some trade, other trade policy issues or other trade barriers. Of course, also using our big array of missions around the world. If we look at Israel's free trade map, so Israel has now 11 free trade area agreements in force that are covering about 70% of its trade, of its global trade. Not in the map, not in the map is South Korea. That the negotiation with South Korea already completed, and it's now awaiting for signing. Basically, all that remains is sign, and South Korea will be the first country in the Eastern Hemisphere to sign an FTA with Israel. Hopefully, not the last. Before moving to my next slide, I just want to bring to your attention that out of this 11 agreements, 4 are from last year. It is Colombia, that was signed long ago, but only ratified and entered into force last year, as well as Panama. And the most recent one is the agreement we have with Ukraine, a free trade agreement, entered into force 2 months ago. And you can also see United Kingdom in the map that due to the Brexit, we had to separate our agreements with the European Union to an agreement with the United Kingdom, which is now came immediately into force when Brexit happened. If we look at the future of Israel's free trade agreement, we see that there is focus on Asia. Some developed. The map, by the way, that you might not recognize is the Euro-Asian Customs Union, comprised of four different countries. In the Americas, we have Guatemala, hopefully to be signed on this year, by the end of this year, and of course Vietnam, where I lived 4 years, and I hope also that Israel will conclude its agreement with Vietnam still in 2021. Some of the agreements or the negotiated agreements in this map are at its infancy, and there's some long way to go until it could be signed. I will move forward. Okay, so if we look at Mexico and Israel, free trade agreement, I think there's some delay. Okay, hope you see the right slide. So the agreement is one of Israel's long-standing agreements signed over 20 years ago. I mean, in force over 20 years ago. It covers mostly trade in goods and gives a lot of attention onto rules of origins and the customs procedures. Since it's an old form agreement, it does not have parts that now Israeli puts in its agreement, like trading services or emphasis, as Ambassador Tal mentioned, no emphasis on IP protection. But the coverage in trade in goods is vast. And I will explain. So if we see the main milestones in the life of this agreement, so it was signed in 1999, a year later it entered into force. And on non-agricultural goods, or as some may say, industrial goods, we granted full liberalization, gradual liberalization, whereas the final step already took place in 2005. Meaning that for those of you in the field of trade and of foreign trade, chapters 25 to 97 all exempt, full tariff elimination. In 2010 was the last significant milestone of this agreement with the amending protocol for transshipment. The transshipment means basically that for certain territories, no direct shipment is needed as long as these territories are engaged with free trade agreements both with Mexico and Israel, and subject to certain conditions, basically minimal change. As long as it follows the protocol, it could be considered as part of the FTA agreement, therefore granting full liberalization when entering into Mexico, enjoying the benefits of the agreement. As Ambassador Aranda mentioned, and also Ambassador Tal, free trade agreements are the highest form of highest level of economic agreements. And when Israel signs, and I guess this is also the approach within the Mexican government, when we sign an agreement, we expect to see potential exponential growth in trade. And since the trade in goods are normally the main pillar of these agreements, we like to analyze the trade. So in 2000, before the agreement entered into force, the total trade volume was $230 million, whereas 10 years later, it more than doubled. If we look, by the way, on the Mexican point of view, this is based on the Israel figures, maybe the numbers in Mexico could be a little different, but for Mexico, it increased by tenfold in 10 years. I mean, the exports to Israel. And when we look at last year's number, we look at over $700 million only for trade in goods. So no doubt this agreement was crucial and imperative to strengthen the bilateral trade and bilateral ties. More recently, we also like to look, especially Israel's trade and business services, or I want to correct myself, Israel total trade and services accounts for more or less half of its total exports. So export of services is about 50% of Israel's total exports. So when we look at the trade and business services, we see a growth that is higher than the growth of exporting goods to Mexico. It's also important to Israel. In the future, maybe we will add when we update, we might add some chapters of trade and services and also investment, trade and services, as well as some other parts that basically could, I would say, we can modernize the agreement in some ways. Another part in the agreement that I haven't mentioned yet is, of course, government procurement, that also regulated by a minimum threshold and entities in the agreement, in the free trade agreement. You can have a glance of the composition of the trade in goods. This is export, like Israel export to Mexico. You can see the composition. And with Mexico, it looks like this: imports from Mexico. And as Ambassador Tal mentioned, another significant event related to our free trade agreement was the recently had Joint Trade Commission under the agreement. You can see some media outlets with these agreements. Unfortunately, I couldn't come to Mexico City because it was held virtually. So I hope I can have another chance in the near future. Maybe we should have another trade commission next year, and I don't want to wait another 10 years to have the next Joint Trade Commission. And it was definitely an important part. It will lead to some, I hope it will lead to some constructive follow-up work, follow-up discussions under the working groups. I want to state that not with us today on screen, but listening to us is also our trade counselor in the embassy in Mexico City, Lior Yafe. I asked him to share also his contact details mainly for the business community. If you wanna keep in touch with us, if you want more information, answers to questions, anything related to our trade. The role of the mission in Mexico is basically to connect Mexican and Israeli companies, but not only companies, also other entities. And it has also experienced local team to support this activity.